So hi everyone, I'm your host for today's webinar, and today I'm calling in from the Kent coast on a rather grey day here. So perhaps while we're just waiting for everybody to join the call, maybe you'd like to put in the chat function if you've got some sunshine today and perhaps where you're calling from. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes. So I can just see our recording has started, so that's good. And my understanding is recording will be sent to you after the session today. I also wanted to remind you before we get going as well that there's some great resources and references regarding this topic of resilience on the Coaching Focus website, and I will be mentioning a few of those as we go through the session, but please do take a look as well yourself. If you have any questions as we go through the different topics from today, then please put them in the Q&A, which I think you can see, and we're going to come back to them at the end of the session when we have our last 15 minutes on questions and answers. So I can see a couple of people who are actually experiencing some sunshine, which is great, and certainly many people who aren't. So sadly not in Dorset. We've got some sunshine in South Derbyshire, I think, which is rather nice, but certainly the south of the country is all a bit yeah, rainy and gloomy at the moment. Hopefully it will cheer up over the weekend. So yeah, a bit grey in London, I am sure. So let's get going. So thank you for your introductory remarks. So this is by way of introduction to myself. I'm your facilitator for this session. But I thought I would kick off. You can read about me on the slide, but I thought I would start by just sharing some of my own thoughts on resilience. And like everybody, I've faced my own challenges in my personal life, you know, losing parents, bringing up children, worrying about finances, you know, many things that concern us all from time to time. But of course, we have these external circumstances as well. We've certainly had more than our fair share of those over recent years. We've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, we've had war still ongoing, and of course we've got the concerns regarding the economy and the ongoing issues regarding our planet and global warming, very much in focus at the moment with the wildfires. So the impact of that does resonate all around us. It affects some, I think, more than others. But I coming back to this idea of resilience and how resilient are each of us, I do believe resilience is a skill, and unlike other skills, it's something that we can learn. So we will likely continue to be impacted by these global concerns, and maybe there are more to come. But resilience does enable us to be less reactive and to recover more quickly. So even when things are, you know, this is my thoughts about, you know, well, what do I do? So even when things seem to be permanent and unstoppable, they do rise and fall, and they do come together and they do fall apart. And this is very much the way of life. And I've also learned, I guess, the art of acceptance. And I think for those people who know me, they would recognize when I say I can be a little bit like a dog with a bone. But I have learned the skill of not wasting my energies fighting things I can't change. Not to be confused with giving up. I certainly don't do that, but shifting my energy into deciding what I can do, what I can do personally. And finally, from my own thoughts, I also have learned to be able to look through a different lens at times. So I can choose, and it's that word choose that's really important. I can choose to see what else is out there, perhaps noticing that there are good things that haven't changed, if you like, my anchors, and I'm sure you've got your own anchors in your life. So as human beings, we're each of us unique, and we all react differently when faced with difficulty. Some emotionally explode, and others do the complete opposite and go very numb. Others of us may, go down a downward spiral with negative thoughts and feelings. And there are those of us that have learned to bounce back. We'll talk more about bouncing back in a moment, and to get through life setbacks. So we're going to explore this a little bit further. But as a starter for 10, I would encourage you to think about, well, what do you think about this topic of resilience? What does it mean to you? How would you define it? And please place your thoughts in the chat function. And we'll perhaps come to some of those in a moment. So while you are thinking about this personal definition of resilience, let's have a look at the goals for today's session. If we could bring that slide up, that's lovely, thank you. So this is aimed at being a practical introduction to a very big topic. So we are going to skim the surface, if you like, and I brought together, I hope, what is a selection of tips, tools and techniques that will give you some things to take away. So we are going to look at the meaning of resilience and its rise to the top of many organisations' agenda when they look at things like employee engagement and well-being. It has certainly, I think, over the last 10 years, probably become a very topical issue across organisations. We are going to look at some very practical strategies, and that's going to be the main purpose of today's session. So those sort of techniques that you can enhance your own resilience, but also that of your teams, whether you are a coach or whether you're a line manager or whether you are just an individual, these are there for you. So let's come on to this understanding the meaning of resilience. So I'm just want to take a quick look while we're bringing the next slide up. I just want you to have a look just to see some of the things that you've come up with. Ability to bounce back when things get tough. Yep. A balancing system, a collection of things we have learned to do in our lives. I love that. And we've got keeping core internal beliefs despite external issues, health recovery. Resilience is having the grit and accountability to work through a variety of different changes. So there's lots of really good stuff there. The art of not giving up. So encourage you to take a look through those. Still many coming through. So great stuff there. But on screen, I've got 3 definitions. So we have got a dictionary definition, which perhaps takes us back to the origins of the word resilience, which was originally a scientific term often used in associating with metals, the ability of matter, so not just metals, but matter to spring back quickly into shape after being bent, stretched or deformed. So you can understand how that has then become applied to ourselves, human beings. Then moving on to mind, and mind describes resilience in the workplace as in the context as the ability to carry out your job to a high standard, even when we're under pressure, and goes on to explain that everyone is resilient to a lesser or greater degree, or to put it another way, has the capacity to be resilient. It is quite difficult, I think, to measure, as it's more a state of mind than anything else. But in 2021, in the very midst of the pandemic, Aon, the large health insurance organisation, found that only 30%, very low amount of workers, felt that they were resilient. So a time when resilience was really knocked for all of us. And even the sturdiest of individuals can perhaps buckle without having the right support, and particularly without having the right support in the workplace. So again, some reflections over the last 3 years, pulling that together. So firstly, is developing individual resilience enough? Or do we need to create an organisation culture of support and resilience? Organisations with resilience people have an advantage perhaps over less resilient competitors. Couple of facts here, a resilient person is more likely to make the right decisions in a crisis, and we've had many of those over recent years, and to make those decisions work. And resilient people are less likely to become ill. Moving on, we need to be more resilient than we perhaps have ever been. There's more than one global crisis we're dealing with right now, and people who have resilience reserves have a significant advantage over those that don't. And that might seem rather harsh, but it's true. And I often get asked if people are born with resilience or is it developed? And I believe the answer is both. I think in the past, individuals had to find their own way to understand and develop resilience. But now we have this emerging science of resiliency, psychology, and this has identified what strengths we need to acquire and how everyone can develop resilience. So I think the most empowering finding in resilience psychology research is that we do have an inborn predisposition to become resilient. So there you are, you're born with it. And we are change proficient. So although we may feel we've been overwhelmed with change over recent years, actually the human species is very good at adapting and changing. So just some oversights there. So let's move on now. Let's start looking at some of these practical steps that we can take ourselves in how to develop resiliency skills and strengths. So resilient people are those who consciously decide that sort of somehow, some way, they will do the very best they can to survive, cope, and make things turn out well. And there are many stories going back through history, whether it be the Holocaust, whether it be people surviving in war zones, that tell us that. We know people can do amazing things when they face major adversaries. So let's have a look at these 5 steps to develop a more resilient you. So the first one is our foundations. It's about optimizing your health and well-being. So this is the first step in developing resiliency skills and strengths. Optimal health is what you enjoy when you live in ways that allow your mind and body to thrive, repair, and heal. It's amazing how sometimes we just forget about that. We forget about the stuff that we just need to do and the impact it has when we don't, not eating the right food, not drinking enough water. But these, as I say, are our foundations. Of course, every person's way of sustaining their health and energy is individual to them. What works for me might not work for you. But some people do seem to live a lifestyle that is designed to make them ill or lead to shortening their lives. And, you know, I would certainly ask you just to have that inward reflection after today's session. You know, am I doing the right things to keep myself fit and healthy? And research by Martin Seligman, you may have heard of him, identified some findings on people who are less likely to develop illness and remain healthy under pressure. So again, if you like, these are our foundations for remaining in optimal health and well-being. So what he identified was that we need to feel in control of our lives. And I think that's a pretty obvious one. We know what it feels like when we aren't. Enjoying good relationships with family and friends, you know, and I'd go back to COVID days when perhaps that was hard to maintain, when we were cut off from our family and friends, and how important that is. Knowing how you feel. We're going to talk about this subject of emotions in a moment, and being able to express your feelings. He said being able to manage change well, developing healthy lifestyle habits, having a growth mindset. You know, what does that mean? It means thinking about our strengths, you know, the things that we're good at, and learning stuff. So turning perhaps those negative experiences into learning. And finally, he said, enjoying activities and relaxation experiences. So again, when we are under pressure and we're being pushed to the extreme, sometimes we forget to take part in those activities that we get enjoyment from. And those are the times when we need them the most. So a good tool for establishing your resiliency foundations might be something like the Wheel of Wellbeing, and there is an example of that on the website. And this lets you know the areas you are strong at and those that need developing. So it's a little bit like a self-assessment tool you can work through yourself to know what you need to do. So that's step one, that's optimizing your health and well-being. And then we come on to this area of good problem solving. And, you know, you might think, well, why do I need to be able to do that to be able to be resilient? And the reason is that if we're good at solving problems, we can get ourselves out of tough situations. And there are three kinds of intelligence that we use in solving problems, which I just thought you might be interested to know what they are. So the first one is analytical intelligence, which is based on logic, reason, and abstract thinking. And many of us will use analytical intelligence to solve problems in the workplace and in our everyday lives. And of course, that can be very effective, but there are other styles, and I just wanted to make a point for these as well. And maybe one of these is your go-to problem solving preference. So the second one is creative intelligence, you know, sometimes referred to thinking out of the box, doing things a little bit differently. So are you one of those people? And the need for creative thinking is more important than ever in today's world because of the churn of constant change. And it's that change that is requiring us to act and think in new ways. We can't do things like we've always done them in the past. We need to be creative about new ways of doing things. And then finally, the third one is about practical intelligence. And I have to hold my hands up and say, this is my go-to style. So this is the one we use to solve situation and real life problems. The advantage of this is we focus on the problem and we look for a practical solution. And it's about sort of looking at things from that very practical aspect. It's the ability to accept the reality of what's happening around us and to do something about it. And there's also a part of it that sort of doesn't get us too emotionally overloaded, because we're thinking about what are the practical options. And we will likely use all three of these at different times for different situations. But interestingly, we will have one that's a preference. So again, think about what your preference might be. And going back to our list of 5, so now moving on to number 3. So the third is to develop our inner gatekeepers, which are self-worth, self-confidence, and self-concept. And we're going to talk about these in a moment when we come and look at emotional resilience. Number 4 is about shifting our attention from what is going wrong to perhaps what is going right, but focusing on our strengths. That's the main thing, and the resources that we have around us. So if you are going to read a book on resiliency that talks quite a lot about this sort of shifting attention and looking at our strengths, then I would recommend The Resilience Advantage by Al Siebert, S-I-E-B-E-R-T. And finally, and I really like this one, it's about being curious. There are many metaphors that we use when we talk about resilience, but I'll use one here. So what does being curious mean? It's about stepping out on the balcony. Sometimes people call it taking the helicopter view, but it's looking at things from a different perspective. Sometimes if we look at things from a different viewpoint, they can seem very different and less scary, shall we say. So that's our 5 steps for developing resiliency skills and strengths. Now I'd like to bring up the next slide and to look at this area around building emotional resilience. I can't stress how important I feel that understanding and being aware of our emotional resilience, how important it is. You know, we are only one being, we are one whole, and we have our body, we have the way out we think, which is our mind, and we have our feelings, our emotions, and everything that's wrapped up in that. And often our emotions are the first things that start to change when our resilience is being pushed. So emotional resilience is now recognised as a key factor in our ability to survive and thrive for both individuals and the organisations they work in. It can be defined as the ability to continually choose the feelings, thoughts and actions that help you achieve results and perform at your best, you know, and that can be at work and it can be in your home life as well. And this is a model. You can see there's a name at the bottom of the slide, a lady called Geeta Bhawani, who wrote an amazing book. Again, that's in the resources on the website, but I'm going to hold it up for you. You might not be able to see it, but it's called Emotional Resilience. So you can't miss that lovely red cover. So emotional resilience in this framework by Geeta requires understanding and paying attention to 6 aspects of emotional related self-awareness. So there are 3 personal ones. This is how they relate to ourselves. You remember that when we looked at that step 3 and those 5 different areas, and that one was step 3 was developing resiliency skills and strengths. And if you recall, it is to develop strong inner gatekeepers. And those are self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-concept. So these gatekeepers all have links to our emotional resilience, and in particular, self-worth. So self-worth is the view we have of ourselves. It's made up of what's happening around us, what people say to us. But when our self-worth starts to go down, then we end up in an emotionally not very pleasant place. So there's self-worth. Moving on to the second one there, it's self-control, pretty self-explanatory. But it's about how we deal with distractions, impulses, feelings, and reactions. The third one is mood. So all sorts of things can change our mood, and mood affects people around us. So other people's moods affect us, and we affect other people's moods. So typically there are 5 things that affect mood: our surroundings, our physical body, relationships, very important, knowledge about what's happening to people we love, and events. There's also an element of our personality or our nature can impact our mood, perhaps how much of an optimistic or pessimistic outlook we have on life. And then the other 3 are to do with our interactions with others. Biggest one here is empathy. And if you want to increase your levels of empathy, I can't say anything else but ask yourself or ask others, are you a good listener? That's where empathy starts. Things like, not interrupting or judging people, and trying to understand what's behind the words, connecting to people's feelings. The second interpersonal area here is understanding. So psychological safety is an important factor in why people stay in their jobs, and it has an impact on well-being in the workplace. So understanding is a strong predictor of high performance in teams, and knowing your team members is important for effective working relationships. So do not underestimate understanding the people that you work with. Caring is the final team competency. And the reality of working in a team is we will experience differences and make mistakes and get emotional at times. Again, it's the fact of life. It's about engaging with team members and working out what needs to be done. So that's a very much a short view of a very important topic. And if you would like to know more, then I would certainly encourage you to explore Gitu's book. So now I'm going to go through a few more slides just to introduce you to a couple of more tools that we can bring into coaching ourselves and others. So if we could bring up the next slide. We had a little bit of a joke about this one earlier on when we were preparing for the session. What's this? What's the tomatoes on the tennis ball? So again, it's all about this bounce back. It's another metaphor that's often used. So if you hit the tennis ball with the racket, it's gonna, go to your component, it's gonna bounce off the floor and it's gonna come back and it's gonna survive. And we know if we do that with a tomato, it's going to end up as a red squish. So what we're trying to do is to develop that bounce back ability. You'll see other metaphors often to do with boats and water levels and buckets and things, but I quite like this one because it's very colourful. So moving on, as I say, we're going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour here, but 2-part storyboard. I love this. Sometimes when people are in the depths of, trying to work through an issue, really bound up in it, encouraging them to sort of get it out is really important. So the idea is, you're sitting with somebody and you are asking them to describe the challenge they face. And it's very important to use the words here. So here's me, that's you as the individual, facing this, and the idea is you're encouraging them to either draw it, write it, or tell it, whatever their preference is. Some people can't put it into words, but they can draw it beautifully. And when you've got that first part of the storyboard out, you're moving on to the second part, which is about, well, what can you do about it? And again, inviting them to write, tell, or draw. So storyboarding maps out the elements in a story or a sequence of it gets it out there, and it does support problem solving as well. So it's a very easy tool, don't need to do any prep. It's just encouraging people to tell their story. So moving on to the next one, which is about varying mental distance. You may remember when I said looking through a different lens. Well, this is what this is about, the what if factor. So trying to, either for ourselves or for others, encouraging them to change perspective. You know, we're often very good at giving other people advice and support, but we're very bad at doing it for ourselves. So, you know, trying to explore, asking someone, well, what if this was somebody else's problem? What would you advise them? How would they perceive them? Sometimes an answer can come out of that. Altering time can lift the pressure off of people. You know, what if you had 3 months instead of 3 weeks? And then reducing probability. You know, when we're going down that downward spiral, just, you know, just saying to yourself or to the person that you're coaching or talking to, what about if this was less likely that the problem was going to happen? What if it didn't? You know, what if the pressure was off? What would you do differently? So it's just, you know, taking it away for a moment, and sometimes that brings clarity. So moving on to another visual tool. This is a seesaw. So again, this is great to get people to draw it. You can see from the seesaw, this is the demands, the pressures are very much weighing down one side of the seesaw. And you can get people to write out or to draw or to tell you what were the resources that they have. You know, going back to that point I made earlier, that sometimes when we're really under pressure, we forget to do the things that actually are the very things that are our coping strategies. You know, doing different forms of exercise, socializing, eating the right food. So it's about loading them back on again, reminding ourselves what we need to do. And then finally, just one more, again, lovely tool about the use of pictures. This is about visualization, you know, again, helping ourselves or helping others, telling the story. So, you know, you're visualizing, you're on this bridge, you're looking forward, or maybe you're not on the bridge, you're just on the bank. So just asking people, look at this picture, where are you? And they may say, well, I haven't put my foot onto the bridge yet. And you could say, well, what would help you do that? Or they might say, well, yeah, I'm sort of halfway across. And what would it take for you to get to the other side? So there's so many questions that you can ask. And it doesn't have to be this picture. It could be something else that calls out to you. But it's just that power of using our eyes, you know, bringing in a different part of our brain to help us work through difficult situations. So that brings the end to the to my telling, to my explaining to you some of the components of resilience. So just a quick summary. We've explored the meaning of resilience and its significance in today's world. We've hopefully discovered ways to support your own and your team's level of resilience. And we've looked at some coaching tools you can use to develop resilience based on the understanding that it's a skill and we can all learn new skills. So just want to open up now to see if we have any questions that I can hopefully answer. So I don't know, team, if there's anything there that's worth, if you could bring my attention to. Okay, so do we have any questions? think we may have some in the chat function. Let's have a look here. Okay, so we've got a request actually to go back to the storyboard. So let's do this first, and then I'll come back to what's your top tip from Sheila. Okay, so two-part storyboard. I think there was a particular question about the second part, but just to go through this again, we're using this concept of being able to ask individuals to tell their story. So the first part is, you know, trying to encourage the individual to describe the challenge they face. So it's to get them to describe it, to encourage them to use the words of here's me facing this. So, you know, they can draw, they can tell, or they can write. And then when they've done that, you're asking them to sort of switch over, if you like, and asking them again to say, well, you know, what might be your coping strategies? Do you have any support or resources that you can bring in? Is it you, the person that they're talking to, that they perhaps can look to for support? And again, encourage them to write it or tell it or draw it in the form of what helps me here. So draw, write, or tell. And then obviously you're working, either if it's you, you're then identifying it, or working with the individual to see how they can bring those things into being. So that's how you would use the second part. So I know that there was a question there from Sheila. Hi, Sheila. I can't see you, but nice to know you're there. I think my top tip, I think the thing that made the most difference to me was understanding of emotional resilience. It really did, yeah, open my eyes as to how I could, yeah, just help myself around emotions. How much does resilience building have to become a habit? I think there are some things that we can do that become a bit more habitual. You know, things like not always be drawn into perhaps looking at the negative, you know, things like looking through a different lens. But I do think it's something that we continually have to pay attention to. I'd like to think that we could keep the foundations, we can mount the foundations of our well-being, that becomes a habit. But I think there may be other things that we just have to continually work at. And that's not a bad thing, because we can just take a fresh approach. So hopefully that's answered your question. So it says some of these skills are close to counselling skills, or the skills of someone who's qualified to give this kind of advice. What should we give to line managers who need to have these conversations? Where do they draw the line of not trying to be a therapist? I mean, it's my personal view and opinion, but I don't think the things that we have looked at today are in the realms of therapy. I think they're in the realms of common sense. I mean, I think if there is a line to draw, I think particularly when you are, you know, we are talking to others, we are not giving them advice. We're not trying to step into the shoes of medical professionals. We are pointing them in the right direction, and we're trying to take them on a journey of discovery. So, you know, I don't think you have anything to fear or worry about with the tools here. They are things that you can use very practically. Let's have a look to see what else there is. So I'm looking at the one here from Lily about having a contingency plan in place about if you yourself feel the problem is bigger than your current level of resilience and coping mechanisms. Yeah, I mean, again, it takes me to that point about being self-aware. And this is again why my focus is often around emotion. So our emotion, how our emotions are, is often an indicator of how we are coping with situations. And I think there comes the point, if we recognize we aren't coping, where we do need to seek advice from others. And that might be going to our GP, it might be contact with an employee assistance program where we are connecting with people like counsellors or getting medical advice if we feel that we really can't cope. So I think, you know, if we follow all the right guidance, but if we can't feel that the problem is bigger than we ourselves can get ourselves out for, then I think that in itself has to be recognised. So the contingency plan, if you like, is I talk to others, I seek help from others when I really feel that the tools that we've talked about today isn't working for me. And then, yeah, I think that completes the questions. So I don't think there's anything else I haven't answered. I'm just checking through. Okay, so I just wanted to leave you with a couple of things. One is a quote actually from the Harvard Business Review, interestingly, that put together this book on managing yourself, and there's some great things in here, but there is a chapter on how resilience works, and just a short quote from this. It says, resilient people possess 3 defining characteristics. They coolly accept the harsh realities facing them. They find meaning in terrible times, and they have an uncanny ability to improvise, making do with whatever's at hand. So I would like to leave you with those thoughts because I think they are wise indeed. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is, following today's session, which we now have up on the screen, is taking away actions, so leaving in actions. I think these sessions are always good, but if we don't do anything, then, you know, what is the point, so to speak? So it may be that there's a book that's interesting you. It may be that it's taking you back to perhaps thinking about, well, am I doing my foundations? Have I got my health and well-being all in place? Or maybe, you know, I'm really interested in one of the techniques and perhaps trying that out in the workplace. So do put a couple of actions down for yourself before you finally walk away from today's webinar. And I hope that you've enjoyed it, and good luck with keeping up your resilience levels. Remember that it's a skill that we can learn, and hopefully this has left you with some further thoughts. So thank you very much, and wish you all the best.